Epilogue. Robert Hansen might still have been free, enjoying a quiet retirement in the Virginia suburbs of Washington, D.C., his dual career as an FBI agent and Russian spy safely behind him. Instead, he was caught, convicted, and sent away to prison for life. None of that would have happened but for the work of four very different men who came together in a way that could not have been predicted. One was an FBI counterspy. Another, a veteran CIA clandestine officer. A third was a KGB officer imprisoned after being falsely accused as an American agent. The fourth was the ex-Russian operative who became the $7 million spy. Their disparate lives became inextricably intertwined by a series of threads that bound them tightly together in an extraordinary journey of espionage like no other. Mike Rochford was the counterspy who never gave up, despite the periodic pressure from FBI headquarters to abandon his quixotic quest for the mole. His long pursuit finally ended successfully in 2001 with the arrest of Robert Hansen. 27 times Rochford had dangled $1 million before KGB officers in the hope of identifying the mole inside U.S. intelligence. Nothing worked. Until the 28th spy, the KGB officer whom the FBI gave the codename Mr. Pym. Rochford's mole hunt went badly off track with damaging results when he focused his investigation on an innocent CIA officer, Brian Kelly. Although he later said he greatly regretted his mistake and felt guilty about it, he persisted in his search. The stakes, he said, were too high to stop. In the end, Rochford's work, his determination, and his ultimate success were recognized by the U.S. intelligence community. In the fall of 2001, he received a secret medal from the CIA in a secret ceremony at the agency's Langley, Virginia headquarters. About 200 people were gathered in the Bubble, the domed auditorium next to CIA headquarters, for the ceremony. Stephen Capps, the CIA's counterintelligence chief, presented the award. Rochford was also given a lapel medal he was not allowed to wear. The citation praised him for his pivotal role in the recruitment of the Russian agent who was able to provide the information that led to Hansen's identification and successful prosecution. His recruitment of the Russian was all the more remarkable in that it was effected in a very short period of time with a very temperamental subject. He turned a cold approach into a fully accepted recruitment in a matter of days. It is no exaggeration to say that there have been few, if any, examples of Soviet-Russian counterintelligence recruitments in the history of the FBI and CIA that compare with this effort. Brian Kelly died of a heart attack in 2011 at age 68. His family and many of his friends believed that but for his ordeal, he might have enjoyed more years. "I believe it shortened his life," his wife Patricia said. Trust and integrity were the most important part of any job in intelligence, and to have the government come down on him must have had a profound impact. His wife confronted Mike Rochford at a panel on the Hansen case in 2013 at the International Spy Museum. I was the other panelist, as the author of Spy, my 2002 book about the FBI man. The event was held by the National Law Enforcement Museum. During the question period, Patricia Kelly stood up, poised and composed, and in a strong, clear voice she said, "I am Brian Kelly's widow. Brian was, for 3 to 4 years, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, under surveillance, including helicopters, false flags, and polygraphs. He was walked out of the agency. For 18 months he was out in the cold. He was never charged, but he was suspected of espionage. His daughter and his 2 sons were interrogated. This was all like a movie. Why did the FBI investigate him so aggressively, she wanted to know, when it had no evidence he was a spy?" My second question, and this is for Mr. Rochford. On November 15, 2000, you heard the tape and the voice was not of Brian Kelly, but of Robert Hansen. Why then, she asked, did the FBI leave Brian out in the cold for another 3 months? until Hansen's arrest, before finally clearing him. She added, "Thank you for stating publicly in this forum that the FBI was wrong." In reply, Rochford candidly admitted his mistake and the FBI's. "It's been a long time coming for public acknowledgement by the Bureau that we were wrong," he said. He then cited one coincidence that had fueled the FBI suspicion. Hansen had used the dead drop Prime in Nottoway Park 17 times with the KGB in his first year of spying, and that's where Bryan did his running. It was hardly a reason to justify Kelly being walked out of the CIA, but Rochford said the FBI investigation was based on a sincere, honest belief the U.S. would continue to lose sources unless the traitor was found. He blamed the CIA for the 3 months that elapsed before Kelly learned that the real mole had been arrested, but said that the FBI had agreed to the delay. The CIA, he said, argued that if Kelly, the prime suspect, was brought back to the agency, Hansen might know and break off contact with the Russians, defeating the FBI's hope to catch him at a dead drop. "I'm sorry for all the pain that was brought to you and your family," Rochford said. He said to me later, "It was an important thing for her to hear. She came up to me afterwards and said, 'It meant a lot to me.' It was the first time anyone from the Bureau had said that." Mike Rochford retired from the FBI in 2004 after uncovering Hansen, the mole who had spied for Moscow over a period of 22 years. Hansen's father, like Rochford's, was a Chicago police officer. The irony did not escape Rochford. The veteran CIA clandestine officer Jack Platt, although long retired, played a key role in the recruitment of Alexander Sherbakov, Mr. Pym, who provided the file that led to Hansen's downfall. Platt, the ex-Marine, forged a unique friendship with the KGB's Gennady Vasilyenko that transcended the Cold War. In time, they became business partners in the Hamilton Trading Group, Inc., their private security company. Platt was on a business trip to Moscow in 1999 to meet with Vasilyenko when the crucial but unexpected events unfolded. He was representing himself, he said emphatically, and not any U.S. intelligence agency. He had cut all ties with the CIA after he retired 12 years earlier. In Moscow, Platt met with Vasilyenko in the offices of Securitar, a private investigative agency headed by an ex-KGB agent. Vasilyenko had previously worked at the security company for several years. Sherbakov had a desk and a telephone at the firm, but his future there uncertain. He approached Vasilyenko and asked if he would introduce him to Platt. Vasilyenko did, but did not stay for their meeting. In their talk, Sherbakov pleaded with Platt to introduce him to other American businessmen. He said he hoped to export Russian artifacts to the U.S. At the time, Russians could not easily leave to travel abroad without a reason. Sherbakov entreated Platt to arrange for a business contact to invite him to New York. That, he explained, would provide the pretext he needed to travel overseas. Platt was non-committal, but said he would look into it. Gennady Vasilyenko did not know that his casual introduction of Alexander Sherbakov to Jack Platt would set in motion a chain of events that would alter the history of U.S. counterintelligence and lead to the arrest of the supermole inside the FBI. At the time, Platt had no way of knowing that either. But there was great irony in the fact that it was Vasilyenko who took the initial step that led to the apprehension of Robert Hansen. When Jack Platt was a CIA officer, he had tried for years to recruit Vasilyenko, with no success. When Platt met with Vasilyenko in Guyana, he dutifully wrote a memo of their conversation. A copy of his cable about that October 1987 meeting was seen by Hansen, who misunderstood the contents and reported to the KGB, erroneously, that Vasilyenko had been recruited. When the KGB saw Hansen's mistaken report, it lured Vasilyenko to Havana, broke his arm, shipped him off to Lefortovo prison for months of interrogation, and fired him. The payback took 14 years, but in 2001 Vasilyenko had the satisfaction of knowing that by introducing Sherbakov to Platt, he had played a crucial role in the detection and capture of Robert Hansen. There were others who played an important role in the spy drama, in particular William Stout, the curator at the Frick Collection. To assist the FBI, where he had once been a language specialist and supervisor, he invited Sherbakov to come to New York to discuss importing Russian artifacts, which he had no intention of doing. When they met, Stout played his part of a businessman perfectly, then walked off stage and vanished. Sherbakov was momentarily buoyed by the encouragement he received from Stout, but his bubble quickly burst in the person of Mike Rochford. His dismay at being tricked was eased by a lobster dinner and generous amounts of Tullamore Dew, and finally by a very large amount of money. Stout was the quiet, unsung hero in the operation that led to the capture of Hansen. Jack Platt died on January 4, 2017, at age 80. He didn't know at first that he was ill, but then went quickly, in a week. More than once in the past, he and his wife Paige had talked about life and death. Both of us agreed that the important thing was quality of life, not longevity. When he became ill, the doctors had proposed various heroic measures. He looked at me, Paige said, and shook his head and told the docs and friends in the room that he'd had a great run on this earth for 80 years, and had no wish to live as an invalid. He died without pain, and as he wished, it was swift. Jack said that is how he would like to go. It was the way he wanted. Gennady Vasilyenko was imprisoned again by the Russians in 2005 on trumped-up charges. But in 2010, he was among 4 persons released from prison and traded by Moscow for 10 illegals in the U.S. who posed as Americans but were Russian spies. The press did not focus on why Moscow was willing to trade Vasilyenko, who had never been recruited to spy for the U.S. But the KGB must have suspected that Vasilyenko had played a key role in Sherbakov's file ending up in the hands of the FBI and the CIA. That is why Washington wanted him included in the trade. He lives now in the U.S., a happy man, and free at last. Sergei V. Skripal, a former Russian spy who secretly worked for British intelligence, was one of the 3 persons held by Moscow and traded with Vasilyenko for the 10 Russian illegals arrested in the U.S. in the big spy swap of 2010. 8 years later, Skripal became the center of an international incident. In March 2018, he and his daughter Yulia were found unconscious, slumped on a bench in the sleepy cathedral town of Salisbury, England, 85 miles southwest of London. They had both been poisoned with Novichok, a super-lethal nerve gas secretly developed in the Soviet Union. Novichok was created in 1973 by 2 scientists, Pyotr Petrovich Kirpichov and Vladimir Ugliev, at Shikhani 1, a secret Russian military nerve gas laboratory on the Volga River near the city of Volsk. After the attack on Skripal, Russia denied knowing anything about Novichok. For decades, Moscow has concealed the deadly nerve agent from the world. Almost all nations, including Russia and the United States, have signed the Chemical Weapons Convention, an international treaty that requires the signatories to disclose and destroy all stocks of such weapons. Russia has said it destroyed almost 40,000 metric tons of chemical weapons under the treaty, including sarin, VX, and Soman. Conspicuously absent from the list was Novichok, since Moscow will not admit possessing it. The amount of Novichok stockpiled in Russia is unknown, but even the 1,000 tons believed to have been initially produced in the 1970s would be enough to kill several 100,000 people. Skripal, 66, a former member of the GRU, Soviet military intelligence, had begun spying for Britain in 1995. He was caught and convicted in a Russian court in 1966. After he was released in the spy swap, he lived quietly in Salisbury, apparently believing he was beyond the long arm of the KGB. But after he and his daughter were poisoned, the British Prime Minister Theresa May accused the Russian government of launching the attack and expelled 23 Russian diplomats in London who had been identified as intelligence officers. Russia soon retaliated by expelling 23 diplomats from the British embassy in Moscow. But the reaction by London was only the beginning of world outrage at the blatant poisoning of the former Russian intelligence officer on British soil. On March 27th, the United States ordered the expulsion of 60 Russian officials and closed the Russian consulate in Seattle. The U.S. move was coordinated with 24 other countries, including major European nations, among them France, Germany, and Italy, who expelled large numbers of Russians. Altogether, more than 150 Russian officials were sent packing. Moscow retaliated 2 days later, expelling 60 American diplomats and closing the U.S. consulate in St. Petersburg. Russia also said it would expel the same number of Western diplomats as those countries had sent home to Moscow. The mass expulsions on both sides raised the level of tension between the U.S. and Russia to levels not seen since the height of the Cold War. The British Prime Minister, Theresa May, said it was highly likely that the nerve gas came from Russia, and the British Foreign Secretary said the assassination attempt was likely to have been ordered by Russia's president, Vladimir V. Putin, a former KGB operative. Putin's spokesperson claimed Russia was not involved. The assault on the Skripals echoed the murder in London in 2006 of Alexander V. Litvinenko, a former officer of the FSB, one of the successors to the KGB, and a critic of President Putin. He had been killed with radioactive polonium-210 after he had a cup of tea with a known Russian intelligence agent. Felix Bloch, suspected of spying for the KGB but never charged, was dismissed from the State Department. He worked in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, as a checker in a supermarket, and then as a city bus driver. Alexander Zaporozhsky, codename Max, the KGB colonel who secretly spied for the CIA, later defected to the U.S. But when he went to Moscow on a visit in 2001, he was arrested by the Russians and sentenced to 18 years in prison for treason. In 2010, he returned to the U.S., freed as part of a trade for the 10 Russian illegals arrested by the FBI, the same spy trade that freed Gennady Vasilyenko and Sergei Skripal. Robert Hansen was sent to the Supermax in Florence, Colorado, the most severe prison in the U.S., to serve his life sentence. Harsh, extra-additional restrictions, known as SAM, were imposed on him by order of successive U.S. Attorneys General. Alexander Sherbakov made it to New York, but he was approached by Rochford and soon realized that he was the target of an intelligence operation that had lured him from Moscow to the U.S. Rochford wined and dined and drank with him for 2 weeks and gradually gained his confidence. Under a death threat from the Russian mafia over a failed caviar deal, Sherbakov decided it was finally time to sell the KGB file he had carefully hidden for so long in Moscow. When he revealed he had the secret file on the mole inside U.S. intelligence, the disclosure stunned Rochford, the FBI, and the CIA. With Sherbakov, Rochford worked out the unprecedented terms for the file, and the Russian left for Moscow with a large upfront payment and a promise that he would eventually pocket millions, which he did. After several false starts, Sherbakov turned over the secret file to the CIA. His work done, the ex-KGB man left Moscow for the last time. He was sailing into uncharted waters, leaving behind his country, his entire world, all that was known and familiar to him, a lifetime. It is an agonizing, excruciating decision for any defector, no matter how rich his financial reward. Mr. Pym had crossed over, and there could be no turning back. Once safely in the U.S., with the file in the hands of the FBI, Sherbakov embarked on his new life in America as a multimillionaire. With the help of the CIA, his extended family joined him in the U.S., where he lived with a new identity under the protection of the CIA. And with $7 million.